anyway, than any other diet advice I've ever seen. I mean, eggs were basically considered, poison. I remember doctors and nutritionists saying, "Don't eat eggs; they're filled with fat and cholesterol, and they're going to kill you." And instead, people started eating noodles, potatoes, carbs, all kinds of carbs, things that didn't have fat. Well, thankfully, Dr. Atkins and other people have promoted some sensible diets like the Atkins diet and the South Beach diet and some other things. And almost all the research that we've seen recently, in recent years anyway, seems to point toward low-carb diets as being the better option for not only heart health, but for all kinds of measures of health. So, with that, I want to introduce our guest for this evening, who probably will have some advice on what type of diet and exercise is best for heart health. And our wonderful guest this evening is Dr. William Davis of the Heart Scan Resource Center. Welcome, Dr. Davis.
Hi, Justin. Am I coming through okay?
You are. You sound loud and clear here, and I'm sure everyone will be able to hear you. And I just remind everyone as we get on with the interview here with Dr. Davis that feel free to ask any questions that you might have. But I want to start out. The first question that I have for Dr. Davis is just kind of give us a little background for people who aren't familiar with you, how you got into cardiology, and also at what point did you become a big advocate or more of an advocate for monitoring your plaque, monitoring your heart, and taking aggressive steps toward of diet and exercise, or maybe perhaps you've always been an advocate in that direction. But just a little background information for the audience tonight to start out.
Sure. My history starts in a very conventional way, which is about 15 years ago. And I was just like the majority of my colleagues, and I was fascinated, obsessed, filled with this need to do heart procedures. And so my day from morning till night was filled with angioplasties. Stents hadn't been introduced yet, but at the time, atherectomies in their various forms. So this is what I did, and it was an interesting, fascinating technology that filled my day. Several things really changed the way I managed and the way I viewed heart disease, one of which was the death of my mother at a relatively young age. She was 62 when she died. And so it really struck me that this was terribly ironic that I was living in Wisconsin at the time. My mother lived in New Jersey, and she'd gone through two-vessel angioplasty just several months earlier, and then she died suddenly. And I even talked to her cardiologist, and I convinced myself that I'd done the right thing and done a good job, and she felt fine. Everything went well, and then I got a call that my mother had died. And that was probably the turning point for me. And though I'd paid passing attention to prevention in heart disease up until then, I think that really drove it home for me. And so the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time in thinking about what we're doing wrong in cardiology and heart disease, but even better, more so, how could we do this better? At the time, in the mid-1990s, this emerging technology called CT heart scans was just beginning to gain some ground. And Milwaukee is a good town, but it's not at the forefront necessarily of all new ideas.
Right.
So we tried to get a heart scan device going in Milwaukee. It took a lot of talking, persuading, a lot of dead ends and a lot of deaf ears, frankly, in the beginning, till we finally got the first heart scan, at that time the EBT device.
Right. Okay.
Going in Wisconsin. And that's now called Milwaukee Heart Scan here in Milwaukee. But and then that's kind of how I got started on the whole prevention, early detection idea.
All right, yeah, that's unfortunate. I feel sorry that, your mother died at 62, whereas what is the average, what is the lifespan now for women? It's nearly 80, isn't it, in the United States, in many advanced nations, anyway?
Yeah, early 80s, yeah. Though, as you and I know, we fear that in 10 years we'll see a declining rate now.
I know, now that you mention that, I hate to sound critical. I don't want to sound snobby. But I am I'm embarrassed, or I don't know. I'm afraid of all the overweight people out there, and what type of burden it's going to be on the healthcare system, and what type of heart disease rates we're going to see. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but heart disease mortality rates have been decreasing over the last couple of decades, haven't they? Have they not?
They have.
But I'm afraid that they're going to start going up again.
That's my fear too. I think a lot of us fear that a lot of these data take some years to develop, and a lot of the trends in health and eating and obesity and all these things don't express themselves next week, next month, next year. It takes several years to show up in statistical analyses. So I do fear that in a few years we will see this uptick in death from heart disease and a number of procedures. We're starting to see this kind of process in children. Of course, we're seeing the first evidence as diabetes and obesity, but I think we're going to start seeing these horror stories of 23-year-olds getting stents and those kinds of things. We haven't seen that become a mainstream process, but I do fear until we gain some sense and sanity in health and eating in particular, that we will likely see that uptick in the next few years.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, considering that the thing is, there's so much good advice out there that's free that you could improve your health with, and it doesn't take that much of a change in order to see improvement in your health. But so many people ignore it, unfortunately.
You're absolutely right. And you know what I fear also, Justin, is that the advice that people like you and I talk about, we're swimming upstream because the overwhelming current of conversation is still deeply entrenched in this low-fat notion. It's giving. You see it breaking. You see the cracks in the mortar here and there. Even the American Diabetes Association just a few months back gave this little sniggering comment about, well, maybe low carbohydrate diets have a role, but only for a few months. But we're seeing that first crack in the entrenched conventional advice.
Yeah, and did you see the same thing, like I mentioned in my little snake oil preview about the extreme low-fat diet and how it probably was some of the worst diet advice available, since everyone just switched to carbs and then sugary type food. But how tough has it been for you as a practitioner to get through to people, and is it just I don't know, is it just the institutionalized thought here with nutritionists and with the government agencies that you got to get rid of the fat? Back in the 70s and 80s, they kind of combined fat and cholesterol as almost as if they were one entity that was bad for your health. It seemed, all the nutritionists, and you are seeing some cracks though. And how do you perceive things going in the future? Are nutritionists finally soon going to get off of the extremely low-fat diet as a good recommendation?
Justin, I do think nutritionists have bought into that idea.
They have.
In fact,
okay.
Yeah, I think now I would distinguish though nutritionists from dietitians. Here's a strange phenomenon for you.
Okay.
If you go to the hospital and you have a heart attack and get a stent or a bypass or whatever, you will be talked to not by a nutritionist, of course, but a hospital dietitian.
Right.
Now, hospitals have this peculiar situation where they're accredited and they need to follow the conventional path as dictated by such people as the Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, yes. And so the dietitian will counsel you, for instance, on an 1,800-calorie American Diabetes Association diet, which, in my view, is a diet that accelerates the deterioration of diabetes. In fact, causes diabetes, causes obesity, causes heart disease. A lot of us know this. It's in fact quite well sorted out in the scientific literature, but it's not trickled down to the Diabetes Association, has not trickled down to the dietitian or the hospital. And so we have these, what I would regard, and I think what you would regard, as heart disease promoting, diabetes worsening diets being offered in hospitals. So dietitians in hospitals, no, they're confined. They're restrained by the way things work in hospitals.
Institutional type of stuff.
Yeah, I think the nutritionists who don't have that same kind of restraint put on them because they're not tied down by the rules of a hospital, they have more leeway to express their minds and to ride the trend of thought. And so I think you're seeing it.